What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical average American here today to react and learn about high school in Canada versus America. Are they different? Are they the same? If you had asked me, I would think things like this, high school, assuming that it's called high school in Canada, like it is in America, would be pretty similar. I can't say I know exactly how Canada divides up the grade levels, such as, or if they even have terms like freshman, sophomore, uh, senior, junior, stuff like that for what grade you're in high school. In America, there's four grades. You're typically in high school from the age of 14 to 18, and it's considered a pretty important time in your young life's development, to say the least. But I was very interested by this video here, where she's going to talk about the differences that she's noticed between Canada and American high school, with the specific declaration that they are very different, which would really surprise me, but at the same time intrigues me immensely. So, with that being said, I'm ready to be intrigued, as you say. So let's take a look.
What's good, guys? I'm Shandi, and today I'm going to be talking about the differences between Canadian high schools versus American high schools. I
Okay.
live in Canada, and I used to think that American and Canadian high schools were really similar until I
Yeah.
went on a trip to Florida and actually talked to some high schoolers and realized that Canadian high schools and American high schools are actually really different.
Okay, so this is perfect. Setting it up like this. She is Canadian, born and raised, I assume, and had an experience in high school in Florida in the United States, and has a bunch of insights. So this is perfect. Perfect.
So I've compiled a list and split them into four categories, which are grades slash marks, whatever you want to call it, extracurricular.
Actually, I want to point out that I really like that she, I believe she's a high schooler or was a high schooler in this situation, so she has lived this rather than it being secondhand knowledge, a lot of it, which is really nice.
Slash events or grades slash marks, whatever you want to call it,
Oh,
and split them into four categories, which are grades slash marks, whatever you want to call it, extracurriculars slash events, structures, and others. And also,
okay.
disclaimer, I live in Ontario in the Toronto region, so some things that I say on behalf of Canada may not be the case for all of Canada. And
Okay.
same thing goes for the US as well. Obviously, I don't live there, so I'm not sure if some of the things on my list would apply to most of the US or just some of the US. These are
Right, right. Always good to get those little details out of the way. I also noticed that she said grades slash marks, which is already the first difference. We call it grades in the United States. I've heard of this word, marks. Marks, like they're marking you, giving you a score or a grade. That is not a term in the United States. But anyway, I'm sure there's lots of stuff like that.
just things that I've heard from other Americans and things that I've heard online. So the category that I'm going to start with is grades and marks. This one really surprised me. So number one is that in the United States, A's start at 90%, whereas in Canada, A's start at 80%. So in the US, a 90 would be an A minus, an 80 would be a B minus, a 70 would be a C minus. Whereas in Canada, an 80 is an A minus, a 70 is a B minus, a 60 is a C minus, and so on.
So, does that mean that the American grading system is more difficult? More strict? She's absolutely correct. You get an A if you get 90% or better. 80% or better would be a B, but in Canada that would be an A. So it's easier to get an A, but this could be counterbalanced, like if Canadian scoring is more difficult on average. Maybe it is more difficult to get an 80%. Therefore, it's worthy of an A. So there's little things like that that could kind of counter this. but this is extremely interesting to me as well. I've never heard this.
When I found this out, I was in Florida at a conference and the speaker told the crowd to shout out what percentage A started at. And while everyone else shouted 90, me and the other Canadians shouted 80%. And I was like, huh? So that was really, really weird to me. So number two is that when applying to post-secondary schools in the US, they look at your GPA, which is calculated using grades that you've gotten throughout high school, whereas in Canada, they use percent averages, which are calculated only using grade 12 and sometimes grade 11 marks. And GPAs just sound so stressful because you have to.
Huh. This might be smart. I'm trying to give my first impression of it. So in Canada, when applying to college and education after high school, they're kind of judging you based off your marks as a 11th and 12th year student, your last 2 years of high school. That might actually be kind of nice because at that point in your life, you're more mature and more capable of understanding how important your education is at that point and how much your marks will impact what schools you can get into. So I actually like that in Canada. They are judging you more on your older self and the marks you get then. Whereas in America, it's based on your GPA, the average of all of your scores, you could say, in your 4 years in high school, which is extremely stressful for a lot of people because you have to be so good for so long, especially if you're going after that elusive, perfect 4.0 score. Yeah, interesting.
To consistently get good grades all throughout high school, whereas here in Ontario, universities only look at your top 6 marks, which includes any prerequisite courses that are required for the program that you're applying to. So most people's averages to apply to university would comprise of 6 of their grade 12 marks, and sometimes grade 11 if you're applying for early acceptances or whatever other reason. Number 3.
Wow. So it's really only the top 6 marks from grade 12. That's such a small sample size. But it's a sample size taken from, like, the oldest version of yourself in high school, like I was getting at earlier, being mature. I guess there's pros and cons to both. Because in the United States, it's a larger sample size. It is more annoying and harder to maintain a high GPA. But in Canada, then you only have so many opportunities to get good marks, and you're going to be judged based on just those. So, I don't know, pros and cons of both, I guess.
Is that in the US, standardized tests are done a lot more frequently and are taken a lot more seriously. So in the US, high school kids take the SATs, which post-secondary schools look at, whereas in Canada, there aren't any standardized tests that actually matter. In Ontario, there's something called the EQAO, which is a standardized test that you would take in grade 3, grade 6, and grade 9. But it's not to measure the success of every individual student, it's to make sure that the education system actually works.
Yeah, I mean, this might be one of the biggest criticisms of American education, besides our obsession with rote memorization over problem solving, which is a whole other issue. But standardized testing, that a huge, enormous part of your life and ability to get into a school is going to be judged based off these, hours and hours long tests that are so stressful for people because people and kids in the United States know how important they are, and they are so boring and so long and so important, and yeah, we take them extremely seriously here. Maybe too seriously.
And that kids are learning what they should be learning. So the next category is extracurriculars and events. So the first thing is that there's no homecoming dance in Canada. And for the longest time when watching like homecoming in movies and TV shows, I thought that homecoming was part of prom. And I didn't find out that HOCO happens at the beginning of the school year until I started getting a bunch of HOCO vlogs in my recommendations.
Yeah, homecoming is like a very typical very cliche, popular. Everyone knows about homecoming dances in the United States. Very big part of the high school experience. That's a good way to put it in the United States.
Like sometime at the beginning of the school year. And so we don't have anything like the homecoming king and queen either. I feel like this would
Okay.
change from region to region, but my high school calls it semi-formal, and I've heard of other high schools that call it winter formal, and that happens in either November or December. Also, in the U.S.
Huh. Yes, well, in the United States, they have formals as well. Lots of formals. Homecomings, proms, lots of dances, lots of stuff. High school kids love that stuff.
It seems like that happens in either November or December. Also, in the US, it seems like people really take Hoko seriously. Like people be wearing whole prom dresses, like formal ass dresses to Hoko.
Yeah.
Whereas in Canada for semi-formal or winter formal, it's like really casual dresses, nothing too fancy.
Yeah, it kind of depends on where you live and what the culture is around where you live. But I think for the most part, um, kids do tend to take homecoming pretty seriously. Like it's this very important part in their lives in high school. I mean, at that age, when you're in high school, everything seems like it's the most important, earth shattering thing ever in your entire life, and nothing will be more important when you're that age. So I understand. I understand that.
And speaking of prom, number two is that unlike in the US, in Canada, we don't have junior or senior prom. We just have one prom, and that is for the graduating class. Only no
Okay.
other grade can attend or buy tickets. And the last thing for extracurriculars and events is that in the US, cheerleading and football seem like such a big deal. Whereas in Canada, it's like literally the complete opposite.
It's funny how much she picked up on in her like brief experience in the United States high school. I know she said she's talked to people about it as well, but she is so right. But it's really only for those who are involved in it. For a lot of kids who aren't involved in cheerleading or football, they really don't care that much. But for those who are involved in it and it's part of their lives, it is a very, very, very seriously taken, important part of high school lives and their experience. Yeah, football, cheerleading. Yeah, I mean, what else do you have to worry about at that point in your life? You might as well enjoy the fact that life is simple at that age, and that football and cheerleading your life can revolve around that for a while. It's fine.
I don't even think that most schools have a cheerleading squad, and if they do, I don't think Canada really has like cheerleading competitions. And football isn't really a big deal either. I think schools take it as seriously as any other sport. And at my high school, we don't even have a guys football team. I would
What? Yeah, it's definitely true that every self-respecting high school in America would have a football team first. That would be like the most important thing for the high school to have. A football team above all else. In Canada, I know hockey is so popular. Are there high school hockey teams? Is that like our version of a football team? Like every high school wants to have a hockey team? Maybe? It'd be kind of the equivalent to that, maybe.
watch movies and TV shows and think that those massive football stadiums are just a TV thing, but I realized that they're not just a TV thing, and a lot of high schools actually have like those massive football stadiums.
Yes, that's absolutely true. High schools, somehow they find the budget. They can't pay their teachers well for some reason, but they can find the budget to build like a $10 million football stadium.
That's actually really cool. I wish my school did huge sporting events like that because they look really, really fun. But I find it insane that like schools will actually hire personnel just to work as a coach for a sports team. I don't think that would ever happen here, and in Canada, or at least in Ontario, teachers just volunteer to be the coach of a sports team.
That's true in the United States. I think usually it's a teacher who is the coach of the sports teams. That's usually the case. But depending on where you live in the United States, they'll take football way more seriously than others. Some high schools will have a reputation for being the best football team in the state, and they have a lot of kids that go semi-pro or pro after college, and they have a reputation for that. And then maybe they'd hire a coach, but usually it's a part of a high school staff member.
So if no teacher volunteers for a specific sport, then there's just no sports team for that year. Number two is that schools seem a lot more strict and disciplined in the US compared to Canada. Now, I don't necessarily think this is a Canadian thing or an American thing. I feel like this might just vary from region to region. At my high school, we don't have detentions at all. And I think if people get in trouble, the school takes more of like a counseling and talk it out type of approach.
Okay, now I'm starting to think maybe this is because how do I say this politely? The kids, American teenagers, are so darn rowdy and bad and and mismannered and difficult that American high schools need to be super strict and have punishments and give detention and be harsh and strict to keep the kids under control, or else the American high schoolers will go crazy and take over. That's the fear. Maybe that explains it. Maybe the Canadian teenagers and high schoolers, although probably, still acting like teenagers, are a little bit more well-mannered, possibly just as a cultural thing. Like she said, it changes depending on where you live, but maybe this is a generalization, but maybe it's true.
Compared to detention, or if it's really bad, they'll just suspend the person. And after talking to some Americans about lunch, I had the longest lunch, so my lunch break is an hour and 15 minutes, and most of the other people I talked to had like 30-minute or 45-minute lunches, and a lot of them weren't allowed to leave school grounds either during lunch, and they were only allowed to stay in the cafeteria, whereas like we can go anywhere during lunch. There's a bunch of
Sometimes when you're a senior, 12th grade in high school, sometimes on special occasions they'll let you go out to lunch somewhere, but it's usually not like that. It's usually pretty strict. And I feel like this again might have to do with the fact that American high schoolers would just take advantage of it and not come back on time and do weird stuff and can't be responsible enough to have that kind of power to even just leave school and be trusted to come back. And yeah, I feel like it's based on that.
Food places. There's a Walmart and there's a mall near my school. So I've literally gone to the mall during lunch. So number three for structure is that in Canada, school starts at the beginning of September and it ends at the end of June, whereas in the US, I think that school usually ends in like May. And then they start back up in August. And honestly, I prefer school starting in September and ending in May, because half the time in Canada in May, it's still cold. Like, tell me why 2 weeks ago in May, it snowed. It's getting nicer, but it's still kind of cold outside.
I can't say I ever really paid attention to the weather or the time of year that we started school and ended school. Only that, we do purposefully time it so that school ends when summer comes because of summer vacation, the 3 months you get off at the end of a school year, and then you come back after summer. So that's the only thing that American high schoolers really care about.
So for number four, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think in the US, they offer AP classes at all schools, whereas in Canada, they only offer it at schools that have the AP program. So there aren't that many schools where you can take AP classes. Number five.
Okay. I would think most, if not all, high schools in the United States have AP classes. That does seem like pretty standard. So she may very well be correct about that. Yeah, because if there's a student who's gifted or wants to achieve more, or even take college courses in high school, one thing America is really good at is giving those students the opportunity to do that, to get ahead, uh, if they have the capability to, which is very nice, very good.
Five is that in Canada we don't have school nurses and they seem to be in like every TV show. But yeah, we ain't got none. Number six is that I don't
No school nurse. Huh. Yeah, I just kind of always figured that the school nurse was just there, just in case you needed her. Never thought about that. Yeah, every school I've been to has had a school nurse. Yeah, it's just nice. Huh.
like every TV show. But yeah, we ain't got none. Number six is that I don't think many Canadian schools have like metal detectors and a lot of security when you enter the school. Number seven is that
Most American high schools do not have metal detectors. That is not a thing. That would depend entirely on what city you're in, possibly if there's high crime rates or something like that, or really depends, and most of the time, there's not metal detectors and stuff like that.
in the US, I think French is offered, but people mostly take Spanish, whereas in Canada, since we have two official languages, English and French, we learn French in school from like grade 4 to grade 9, and then after grade 9 it becomes optional. And in
Huh.
Quebec, which is like the French speaking part of Canada, they take English. And
Okay. She is sort of correct. Um, in America, you, right around, the beginning of high school, you're pretty much required to take half a year of a language, which is not much at all. Pretty much 1 year of a language, essentially. And you get to choose what language you want to take. It does not have to be Spanish. It's usually Spanish, German, French, maybe Japanese, I've heard of. And it's pretty. Oh, I think a lot of kids take Spanish just because we have a lot of Spanish speakers in America and it's kind of useful. But very rarely do students get a lot out of language courses in America because you really only have to take it for a year and then you kind of forget it and you just take it because you have to. Whereas I really like in Canada, where if they're teaching French or English, in the case of French speaking students, they're doing it for years and years, which is, of course, the way you have to teach a language if you want any measurable level of success and for the language to stick. Um, yeah, I always wished that they taught language more, a second language in American school, even though I would have hated it at the time. I would have really benefited from it in the future. So, yeah, students in America can take French, but they usually take probably Spanish or German, even, and not for very long. So it doesn't accomplish much, in my opinion. But yeah, interesting difference there.
lastly, this is like solely for Quebec. No other place in Canada or North America uses this system. And for the last category, which is other, and first is that in the US, basically everyone calls post-secondary school college, whereas in Canada, there is a very distinct difference between college and university. Number two is that
Oh, I have probably been doing this. Oh boy. Yeah, in the United States, people just use the term college and university interchangeably, like there's no difference. As a matter of fact, sometimes Americans talk to each other about, hey, what do you think the difference is between a college and a university? Because you'll have like such and such college down the road, and then such and such university down the road. And then you start wondering, well, they're both colleges, they're both universities, it's the same thing. What's with the name? Why is it a different name? So Americans don't even know the answer to that. So it makes way more sense to me, actually, that Canada, there is a distinct difference between a college and university. And now I'm just wondering what that difference is. What's the difference? What's the definition, if you will?
people don't say freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior like in the US. We just say grade 9, 10, 11, and 12. So I don't think I've ever heard anyone say I'm a junior in high school or I'm a senior. Like, no. If someone asks you what grade you're in, you would just say, I'm in grade 10. Or
Okay. I was actually wondering about this. In the United States, you would essentially only use the word freshman for grade 9, sophomore for grade 10, junior for grade 11, and senior for grade 12. I don't know why, because it sounds kind of cool. It kind of sounds, and I swear, at that age, when you become a junior or senior and you get that title, it almost feels like an accomplishment, like you've earned it, the title of being called a senior, a junior. It has like a ring to it, a power behind it. When you're living in the high school, in that experience as a kid in the United States, it means something to you. When you're a freshman, you feel like, oh God, I'm at the bottom of the totem pole. I'm nothing. People will even say the word freshman, like, hey, freshman, like it's a bad word. It's kind of funny how that all that stuff works in the social climate of high school. But yeah, that's very, very, very much an important part of American high school, for sure.
I'm in grade 11. Number 4 is that US high schools and the US in general just seem so much more patriotic than Canada. Like, I think Canada has patriotism, but like, okay, so I'm editing right now, and I don't know why I keep saying patriotism. I know it's patriotism. Like, why the fuck am I saying patriotism? But anyways, yeah, just keep watching. Also, ignore my hair because it looks pretty
I did notice she said patriotism, but I wasn't going to say anything about it. It's fine.
rough right now. But the US has like way more patriotism than Canada. And I find it almost eerie that everyone pledges to the flag every morning in the US. Like, it's kind of creepy. And
I think actually, well, the way that it really works, I think, is when you are really young and you're a very young child in America growing up, you pledge allegiance to the flag. It's a whole, oh gosh, oath or speech that you make in the morning. Everyone does it at the same time. Someone usually leads it, like the teacher or someone, and you say this whole thing where you pledge your allegiance to the flag, and it's this old tradition that I think is somewhat declining in American schools. But anyway, you spend your whole life doing it as a kid in the United States, pledging allegiance to the flag. It's the speech you do every morning. And I think you don't really realize that it's a little strange because you've been doing it since you're a kid. Then when you get to be in high school, you start thinking like, this is weird. I don't really feel like doing this. You start thinking like, do I agree with everything I'm pledging to right now? Because the whole speech has you say a bunch of stuff that you may or may not agree with at that point. You're a young adult. So to her point, I think by the time you're in high school, some kids do think like, oh, I'm not even going to say this anymore. And, I haven't been in high school in a while. I don't even know if they're still pledging allegiance to the flag. I assume they are. But it's very much like an older tradition that a lot of kids in the U.S. do just because we were taught to do it and not for much other reason. So, interesting point, though. Interesting. Good to think about.
in Canada, we just stand to the national anthem in the morning. Except for Quebec, they don't do that. I find it so weird that some US schools have military scouts like right in their high school. It's definitely not a thing in my region, but I don't think it's a thing anywhere else in Canada.
Yeah, and you don't have to pledge allegiance to the flag and say the thing if you don't want to, by the way, which is good if it makes you uncomfortable. And yes, there are pre-military programs in high schools because the United States is constantly wanting to recruit people into our military because we're the United States and that's just what we do.
And lastly, teachers are just paid better in Canada. I'm not sure how reliable this is, but I read somewhere that in like some southern states, teachers can make as little as $15K a year, and that is absolutely ridiculous. Like, here in Ontario, minimum wage is $14 an hour, and you can literally make more by working a full-time minimum wage job than being a teacher, if that piece of information is true.
I don't know if that's exactly true. 15,000 a year would be pretty much insane. But I absolutely agree with this statement. Teachers, by and far, in the United States, are paid horrifically. Terrible pay. Doesn't make any sense at all. They have one of the most important jobs in our entire society, teaching the next generation of people, you know? The next generation of kids in our society. Your children, you know? They're teaching them. They are growing with them every day. They take care of your kids. They teach them. It is such an important responsibility. And it's not easy. It's a very difficult job to do well. So with any other difficult job, you get paid well. Except when you're a teacher, doesn't make any sense. The United States government needs to change that, because pretty much all high schools are government funded, if I'm correct. So that's pretty much on the United States government. You know, stop spending so much on the military and give 10% of that to teachers, and bam, we can 5x their salaries, and it'll help everyone, because they'll probably be more incentivized to be there and do better and care. But for now, if you become a teacher in the United States, it's really just because you love the job, your love of the job, and that has my utmost respect, for sure.
You could have a whole teaching degree and make $15K a year from your job. That's ridiculous. And that's all that I have for this video, I think. And that's the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I like learning about the differences between America and Canada in general, because I find the cultural differences interesting, so I definitely enjoyed making this video. If you know any other high school differences between the US and Canada, just let me know in the comments down below. And if something I said...
Okay. Oh, I think that's pretty much the end. That was by Shandy. And I liked that. I liked that a lot. I think that was a great video. That had a lot of really interesting, true points. At least the points about the United States were true. I'm assuming everything she was saying about Canada is true. And if so, this was fascinating. I never would have imagined there were this many differences. Some little tiny little details that you would never have expected. These little differences between Canadian high school and American high school. It really made me think and analyze stuff a bit. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of interesting differences that I don't think you could really appreciate or even know, except for someone in this position making a video like this, someone who has experienced both types of high schools or talked to people about it. So I really enjoyed this. This was unique to me. This was very interesting. Anyway, if you found this video interesting and unique and special, feel free to leave a comment or give it a like. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada, Canadian culture, things in Canada, stuff I've never seen before, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.